Hey, it's Matt. I'm back with another 7 by 10 inch transparent watercolor. This time it's a female eastern bluebird. I painted the males before, and they're, they have those brilliant blue colors that are really saturated. They're very showy, and I thought it'd be fun to try to paint a female. And the females, a lot of these female birds are just beautiful birds, but when you paint them, sometimes they just don't look as exciting as they are in real life. You look at the female bluebirds in real life, and they have this beautiful, subtle qualities to them, and I wanted to try to capture that in this painting. Because they really do have a lot of nice color on them, but sometimes when you have them against a bright background, they kind of just, they look dull by comparison. To do this painting, I wanted to have a nice soft background that kind of had some atmospheric perspective. To get that kind of look, I started with a wet-on-wet wash where I totally saturated the paper with water, and then I brought in some pre-mixed colors. My original photo reference had a very gray background, and I wanted to warm that up and use kind of some oranges and pinky red colors that would go well with the breast of the bird, but they'd also contrast the blues on the bird's back, and I thought that would make for a better painting and show off some of those subtle colors a little better. Once I had the first wash down, I hit it with the hair dryer and decided I wanted to bring in some more deeper colors and a little bit more saturated. So I put in the second wash on dry paper. You can see it likes to puddle up at the edges of the frisket, so in some of those places I took a little tissue paper and sucked off the edges so it didn't leave a little bit of a halo around those. Then I hit it with the hair dryer again to lock in the colors. Once I had the main background in, I wanted to add some nice soft out of focus looking branches in the background. With an airbrush, that's real easy to do. With transparent watercolor, the best way to do that is to wet the paper and then let the water carry the pigment across. So I pre-wet the paper with the mist bottle, and then with the brush I brought in some of those same background colors and let the water carry it across the paper a little bit. It was important to have the paper evenly wet. And you can see that it did make some nice blurry, out of focus branches in the background. And then I locked those colors in with the hair dryer. And then I wanted to have some middle ground details. So with these, I just didn't want to pre-wet the paper. I just had those on the dry paper, so they'll have a sharper edge than the nice out-of-focus blurry stuff in the background. And I think most of that was done with the sharp number 2 brush. As the middle ground things came through, I wanted to control how much contrast there was and how much saturation. So I pretty much was using a lot of those same colors from the original background washes. And as I got more into the foreground, I started introducing some other colors. I wanted to control how much contrast there was in the background as well. I want my maximum contrast and my maximum saturation to be on the bird and on the foreground elements of the perch that the bird's on. And I want that to kind of fade as I go back. So I didn't put a lot of super darks into the background or a lot of saturated color into the background. Most of that was done kind of trying to be restrained because I know where I'm going with this later. I did put in some more blurry things in the background as I went on because I felt it needed a little bit more depth. So I painted those in and then just hit the edges with a little water to make it, to loosen them up a little. When I was happy with the background, I just peeled off the liquid frisket and then transferred the sketch from my sketchbook using some tracing paper and a folding bone. my goal at the next point was cover as much of that white paper as possible, as quickly as possible, so I can start balancing the colors of the bird against the background. So I put the lightest local color of all those areas in. And I think pretty much everything at this point was pretty much done with a number 2 round brush. Once I had the first colors in, I was able to kind of start glazing in the second and third layers as it gets a little darker. And the old formula with watercolor of working light to dark does work. I almost never scrub in to mine to lift color. I try to just build it slowly. And you can see on the right that the palette is, I'm using very watered down colors, just using lots of layers. I started bringing in a fair amount of green. The hawthorn branches that the bird was on do have a fair amount of green in them, and one advantage of this kind of reddy orange background is that those greens will help pop it with the contrast from the background a bit. You got a glimpse of my photo that I was using for reference that I took in the backyard on our hawthorn tree. And in the original photo, the background was kind of fairly gray, and I wanted to push that more in a warm direction to have the blue colors of the bird really pop. So I manipulated that a little just to make for a better image. At least what I thought was a better image. This female bird kept coming up to our shed, and it was the male and the female were obsessed with chasing the other bluebirds that was actually their reflection in the window of the shed. So I was able to get lots of really great photos of the birds. And once I got my photos done from inside the shed, shooting out through the window, I then covered the windows up with some newspaper for a few days so they would stop chasing at the other birds. They were relieved not to have the competition for the nest boxes once the newspaper was up. They're beautiful birds. We haven't had them nest in the yard in the past few years. But it made for some good photos. I wanted to control how much saturation there was in the colors on the bird, and I wanted that really to be our main focus. And I brought in some of those saturated colors onto the branches. And I also wanted to control the amount of contrast. So your eyes usually goes to the areas with maximum contrast. In this painting, it really is the bird's beak, its eyes, and the feet, and the edges of the wings, and some of the little thorns on the hawthorn. And so I had that in the foreground where I had the maximum contrast, and then I let that maximum contrast, I started having less contrast as I went back into the background, and that let it fade in. And I did the same thing with the saturation. I had the colors that were saturated up front, and I had them get less saturated as it faded into the background. And that can be a good way to build up depth in a painting. And also to move your eye around, to kind of control where those little sparkles of contrast and detail are, and your eye will always gravitate toward those. So if you have some secondary areas of focus and contrast and saturation, you can actually have the people look through different parts of the painting and manipulate where they're looking, and have some secondary areas of focus and interest in the painting. At least that was how I planned it. One challenge with painting birds is that naturally the birds have what they call adaptive counter shading, and that's just fancy words for saying that the bottom's, you know, a little bit lighter and the top's a little bit darker, and then with the natural lighting that kind of makes the bird harder to see. It's great if you're hiding in a tree, but it makes it hard for making a painting of a bird look good because they tend to look a little bit flatter. So with a lot of these paintings, you have to kind of manipulate the painting a little bit so the bird looks very round and full in 3D. So you can kind of manipulate how much of that counter shading you're showing, and sometimes I do that by using a little bit more saturated color in the shaded areas, and be a little less literal than some of the birding folk might like. But I think it makes for a better painting. And again, these aren't field guide type illustrations where you're worried about, you know, well, there's a little bit of blue on the bird's belly. Well, yeah, but this is a painting. It isn't a identification guide. And it looks right. I mean, the colors end up looking like it has a white belly and the rusty color, even though you play with those a little bit to make for a better painting. As you get late in the painting, really it was just sharpening up a couple of little details here and there and calling it quits. I think there's just little areas, and I signed it and it was done with. So again, this was a small painting, a 7 by 10 inch transparent watercolor of a female eastern bluebird. Well, thanks for watching. If you have a chance, take a peek at the blog and the website and leave a comment if you like.